Well, good evening to all of you, and welcome to this session on how India can become a global manufacturing hub. This is, as conferences and events go, this is the session of tailenders, as we say in our cricket parlance, when rest of the batting lineup has gone to the pavilion, with one difference, that my panelists today are heavy hitters. That's why I find, even for a tail end session, attendance is pretty good, and I see serious, interested faces, so thank you very much for coming in. Manufacturing is a sexy thing in India, because wherever we talk of growth in India, people who are skeptical about growth, as they are skeptical about everything in this country, they say, but growth you have is in manufacturing. What about growth in services, not manufacturing? So what about manufacture? The fact is that there is a great opportunity in manufacturing in India, but some things have to be fixed. And I have on the panel some people who face those problems and some who are charged with fixing those problems. There is a problem with infrastructure. This country has to have better roads, ports, railways, and power, for heaven's sake, if it has to lay claim to becoming a manufacturing power. Our ports, for example, still have one of the longest turnaround times, which is simply not acceptable these days. Our tax policy has to get aligned with the best in the world. As we know, that's a work in progress. Kelkar committee is working on a new goods and services tax, which once it works out, will revolutionize the tax system. In fact, it has the potential to knock off nearly 10% from the existing aggregate level of indirect taxes. Then our overall governance must improve. We cannot allow Inspector Raj at the local level to impede our industry while reform takes place at the top levels. You talk of governance, you also talk of law and order. Many parts of the country, particularly in central India, where our mineral resources are located and many of our big manufacturing industries located, or has the potential to be located, are now hit by Maoism, Maoist extremism, which has to be sorted out. And then there are two other challenges. One is the challenge of skills. Some of the panelists will tell you that you can set up a great industry, a plant, you can get roads, railway, ports, power, everything. But what do you do if there is an inadequate availability of human capital? So you need skilled Indians to man these industries, and that is an area which is lacking in a big way. My panelists today, you know many of them. Jyotiraditya Scindia, our very young Minister of State for Commerce and Industry. He is genuinely a young minister, and I have to tell you a little story about a story that I've treasured for a long time, my conversation with his late father. I once wrote an article which said India on a walking stick, which basically was complaining about the fact that our politicians tend to be too old and our younger politicians are not given any responsibility. And he called me and he said to me that, look, they keep telling me, you are still young. We can't give you more responsibility yet. And he said, I am a grandfather. How much older do they want me to become before they give me responsibility? But here is a very young minister, the son, who's got responsibility. He's the Minister of State for Commerce and Industry, and he's a third-time MP and a second-time minister. So he's an experienced, he's a young veteran. He'll talk about where the government is headed in solving some of these areas. I also have Baba Kalyani, who really is one of the dadas of Indian manufacturing. When we talk of, we Indians have a complex about our manufacturing. The stereotype from my childhood times used to be, if you go to a store overseas, what do you see made in India? You see almost nothing made in India. And now we've been saying for a long time, so proudly, that you open up a truck in the US and see where are all the crucial parts coming from. They're coming from Baba Kalyani, Chairman and Managing Director, Bharat Forge. There's Arun, member of Planning Commission, who's come from the industry. He's been consulting. He was a thinking businessman, and he's a thinking policymaker now. Wonderful to have him in the Planning Commission, and even better to have him on our panel. We have Joerg Mueller, President and Managing Director of Volkswagen in India. who's setting up a new industry. I'm sure he is also having to face some of these challenges. And also, you are lucky because you've come to an India which is resurgent, where foreign investment is welcome and where states are wooing you. This is a far cry from how situation was in this country 10, 15 years ago. I remember when Madhu Dandavade was our finance minister, the German ambassador told me once in great exasperation, the then general ambassador, he said, we met your finance minister, and he said, I don't mind getting FDI, but I will not go out looking for it, right? So we've come a long way since then. So very happy to have you here. What we'll do, Mr. Scindia, if I can request you to speak for a little while, you know the broader canvas, and then we'll kick off the discussion.
Thanks, Shekhar. Let me just kick off from where Shekhar started in terms of talking about India's placement on the world stage as an IT superpower and an ITS superpower. Yes, there were, or there are issues in terms of bottlenecks on the infrastructure front, but I think India has emerged as a global manufacturing hub as well. You have many examples before us today, one seated amongst us with Bharat Forge in place. Reliance is one of the top 10 petrochemical companies in the world. You have companies like Tata Steel, which are moving, not only multinationals coming to India, but Indian companies moving from their domestic space into a transnational corporation space and then into a multinational corporation space. Companies like Mueller, Tata Steel. You have LG that has actually looked at India as an export hub for its West Asia and Africa markets. You've got companies that are looking at India for innovation. The example of Hyundai that has set up its small car manufacturing world base in India, innovating new models, looking at the outside space. So there's a lot happening on the manufacturing side as well. I really believe that the key impediment to transforming India into a global manufacturing center is not necessarily the bottlenecks that we talk about in terms of infrastructure, but the key issues really that confront us today are entrepreneurship and leadership capability. And any country that possesses those can overcome the hurdles of infrastructure, notwithstanding that the government has to do their job as well. The government this time around, as was the last time around, is committed to raising investment in infrastructure. We have a very stiff target that we've set for ourselves, raising investment percentage from 7% to 9% of GDP in infrastructure. What that talks about is close to a $500 billion opportunity in roads, power, telecom, across the board. And also presents a business case for many companies that want to look at deployment of capital. There are a number of steps that the government of India has taken, whether it's the Delhi-Mumbai freight corridor, the north-south, east-west corridor, the Kochi transshipment port that we're thinking of, the interport connectivity. So there are things that are moving at a gigantic space on the infrastructure side. That being said, I believe that India possesses 5 or 6 key comparative advantages in the area of global manufacturing. The first, of course, is our own domestic market. Unlike other Asian exporting nations, India also has a very, very large domestic market to cater to. And I believe that the next paradigm shift and the next growth curve is not going to come from urban India, but really from rural India, where you're talking about 600 million consumers across the board. So that's number one. Second, also in terms of our wage competitiveness. The average laborer today in factories costs companies between somewhere around $2.50 a day, whereas in Thailand it's close to about $4 to $4.50, in China $5 to $8 a day. Third is our talent pool. The fact that we have 400,000 engineers being churned out every year, that I believe is one of our key comparative advantages, our HR, our human resource, our strong engineering ecosystem. The fact that we have close to 40 million skilled labor across the length and breadth of this country, and the government's very ambitious National Skill Development Corporation that we have set up, which is a PPP program that's looking at training with a target of close to 30% of 500 million laborers across this length and breadth of this country. And this is where institutions and stakeholders such as yourselves can come in. It's a 51-49 JV in terms of a PPP alternative that we've looked at, where we are requesting companies to come in, take over ITIs, polytechnics, set up vocational training institutes. A 12,000 crore corpus, which is roughly about $2.5–3 billion, has been set aside by government for this key initiative as well. So I think a lot of steps are being taken.
Something's burning.
Yep, I think we do have smoke.
To apologize for the delay that happened on the other side. As we've been informed by the hotel, there was a part of the air conditioning unit which has burnt out, and hence the smoke came through the air conditioning unit into the room. I'll return it to Shekhar Gupta right away, but just to keep you informed that the closing plenary session with all 6 co-chairs and Minister Chidambaram will be back in Durbar Hall, by which time the air will have been cleaned at 6:30. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, all you brave people who not only had the courage to come back in spite of the smoke, but also who resisted the temptation of escaping to something else. And I have to thank my panelists also for being patient. What this has done is it's taken about half an hour away from our time. So I'll request my panelists to be a little bit briefer than they may have planned to. And also at some point very early in this discussion, I will invite interventions from all of you. Please raise your hand with a question or a brief intervention. Now, Mr. Scindia, if you could just resume, for those of you who've been brought up in India and who are at least my vintage, or even if a little bit younger than me, you'd remember from our younger days, something we had got used to on Doordarshan, which used to have frequent interruptions, and we used to have that little thing saying, "Rukavat ke liye khed hai." So, on that note, "Rukavat ke liye khed hai," Mr. Scindia.
So I was talking about bottlenecks and how leadership and entrepreneurship can help us override that. And we've just had an example right in front of us 20 minutes ago. Something went wrong, and we're back in another room in the same hotel, and we're carrying on as we had thought we would. So that's India for you. We are all going, we're all systems go, and if there are hiccups and speed breakers along the way, we will make amends and we'll make sure we are back on track. So just concluding very quickly, because I know we are short on time, I've talked about 3 competitive advantages that we were looking at: the huge market, wage competitiveness, and our skill pool. And the last 3 I'd like to talk about is the fact that, first, products where we have a comparative advantage. There are 40 products in the world that comprise of close to about 0.2% of global trade and are growing at 12% CAGR, comprising of products from the engineering space, apparel space, even prefab construction, medical, surgical equipment, and collateral. And India trades in 20 of those products. So I think it's very important that we focus our initiatives around those products as well. Number 5 is actually geographic dispersion. The IMF has forecasted that growth in the years to follow is going to come from the developing world. 9% from China, 6.5% from India, close to 5% from Africa, 3.5% from Brazil, and the developed world is only going to grow at about 1.5%. Also, along with that, the imports that these countries are going to command, which means exports for us, is roughly about 4.5% across the developing world and close to only 1.2% from the developed world. So very clearly, from a strategic point of view, it's important to look at the developing markets as your next markets. However, if you look at India's export basket today, and you look at EU, US, and Japan, they comprise of almost 65% of our export basket. And the new emerging markets where we should look at, which is Africa, Latin America, are only close to about 11% of that basket. So in our foreign trade policy, we try to change that track much more towards new markets through our market-linked focus product scheme and our focus market scheme, 29 new markets. The last core advantage that I firmly believe is our clustered approach. The very fact that we have 388 clusters across the country today. Chennai is a great example of that, of what Hyundai has done. A whole ecosystem has been brought to bear there. Very few countries in the world that can match that. So all of these 6 advantages together, I believe, will propel India as a global manufacturing hub in the time to come.
Baba Kalyani, if I may invite you to speak now. You work in one of those clusters, or in fact more than one of those clusters. Does the cluster approach work? And talk about the advantages you've had setting up this great manufacturing business in India and the challenges you've faced. And what is it that you would now want fixed?
Clearly, the cluster approach works. I think, as the minister said, it provides an ecosystem where you have a combination of skills, talents, technology, and just the working ethos of doing things right. And Pune is one of these clusters where you have had many technocrat entrepreneurs in the manufacturing sector leapfrog in the last 10, 15 years from a domestic market orientation to a global market orientation, whether it's exports or whether it's, being really integrated in the global markets. We are one of those examples. Prior to 2000, we were a company that was completely in the domestic market, revenues of less than 100 million, and in roughly about 8, 9 years, we had almost leadership position in the world markets in products that we supply, and with revenues 10 times that. So it's a good example. Now, what makes it happen? I think that's important. I think the minister raised some of the issues, some of the areas that he called advantages. I have always maintained for the last 10, 15 years that India's advantage lies in manufacturing that is technology intensive. It does not lie in manufacturing that is labor intensive. I think we have this wrong notion that our labor costs or let's say our wages are low and therefore we should be competitive. Nothing can be more wrong than that. I again take the example of our own company. In the 80s, we had a wage cost of roughly about 700-800 rupees per month per employee. And today we have the same wage cost running at 20 and 30,000 rupees per month per employee. We were never competitive in the 80s. We are extremely competitive today. And the difference is technology. The difference is technology-intensive manufacturing. So clearly that is a differentiator in India. Again, where does India grow in the manufacturing sector? It's going to grow in the areas where we can lead by innovation. Some examples are the nano, what has happened with the phone systems, for example, what General Electric has done for their medical system, an example that Mr. Prahlad, C.K. Prahlad points out many times. That's the area where India will grow. We just need to learn to become innovative. There was a session before this on innovation. And when you talk about innovative manufacturing, you need to talk about how you can create low-cost products. I was in a session 2 days ago with Carlos Ghosn of Renault. And he said that there is no place in the world that can produce products at a price point that India can produce. And he's fully convinced that India is the place to make the small car. So it's things like that that are going to propel India in the manufacturing center. Now, what are the challenges? We have a couple of challenges. Number one, whenever our GDP rate crosses about 7.5%, 8%, we have an enormously large skill shortage. As long as we are below 7.5%, somehow the supply and demand of skills kind of matches. The moment it goes beyond, we have seen this in 2006, we have seen this in 2007, early parts of 2008, and Joerg Mueller will testify to that, at least in Pune area, and I know this is true even in other places like Chennai. We have had turnovers in our companies crossing from 2 and 3% to 20 and 30%. Now, clearly, that is a very unstable environment for manufacturing and something that we can ill afford to do because that one element can put you back by years, if not months. So this is an area that needs to be addressed. We need to dramatically increase the capacity of our skill building institutions. I know there's a lot of work that's being done. We have participated as a company in creating one of the new ITIs around Pune, which is now classified as one of the best ITIs in the country. So industry is doing its bit, but I think a lot more needs to be done. The second challenge is, and I don't want to get into all the issues that were raised here earlier and what Shekhar talked about. The second challenge is The whole capacity building and infrastructure provides a huge opportunity for manufacturing. Whether it's power plants, you need to add power capacity which is 7, 8 times what we have today in the next 15, 20 years. Now, where are you going to get equipment? Where are you going to get the power generators, the steam generators, or the nuclear power plant? There's simply no capacity in the world, maybe other than China, who can supply all this. So we need to build our own manufacturing capacity. This provides a huge opportunity, whether it's the power sector, whether it's the railways, the transportation sector, the mining sector. The one big hurdle, the one big challenge here is this largely is today in the state sector and the public sector. And in anything in the state sector has one conditionality, which is very complicated. And no amount of entrepreneurship or leadership can address that. And that conditionality is you need previous experience to even to qualify to bid for a tender like that. Now, if you have zero manufacturing capability in India and you need previous experience to get into this infrastructure business, I'm afraid Indian companies will lose out. So I'll stop at this. This is how I see the situation.
Thank you. Joerg Mueller, do you testify to what is said? Are you facing skill shortages as well?
Not yet, as we are in the ramp-up phase, but to tell you some experiences, in general, we find very, very good and with basic, let's say, basic skills, well qualified people. This is clear. But if you're talking about certain demands we have, when we take a look at our technologies, for example, if we're talking about maintenance things and so on and so on, there we have to do quite a lot to, let's say, improve the knowledge, and also people don't have these experiences. This we have to, on this we have to work quite a lot. But in general, what from our point is very important, and if you're talking about manufacturing hub, this means it is important for employment also. Manufacturing means in general to give employment to people and also the opportunity to increase income. That is a very, very important thing for a country in general. But therefore, in general, I would like to talk a little bit in general also. You need products, you need to find customers and markets for products which are globally and locally competitive in terms of price, functionality, and quality also. And quality is again an aspect which is important for us, because people need to understand, if you want to have high performance orientated production systems, for example, you need also people who are thinking in this direction, who think in competition, who think in precision, quality, productivity, and all these kind of things. And this is something, and this combined with basic skills, now I come to the vocational training, for example, there I think it is important to have a kind of combination of all these items together, at least to have a sustainable and good productive working force. And this is important for the whole manufacturing area, I think. And there a lot of things can be done from the educational point of view. It's not only the topic MBA, to say one thing, which is very important. If we are talking about the leadership, this is very, very important. I agree with the Honorable Minister, it's clear we need leadership, but we need also people who are interested, also as engineers, as people coming from universities who are interested in working on the shop floor, for example, to implement all these things, what I've mentioned in terms of productivity, quality, and so on and so on. And there, I think there is a need to do something, and this is what we're trying to do in our company now. And as I said, the people we are getting, we have fantastic people on board. Our team is really absolutely motivated and very well qualified. But we have to do a little bit more, and this is what we are doing in our house. But we did not face problems to get people up to now. Don't know what will happen if we talk about the growth rates and what is coming, what everybody wants and needs. This is clear. But maybe that in the future there will be a shortage of qualified workforce. This is possible.
Tell us, what are the biggest surprises you ran into when you came into India? A pleasant surprise and an unpleasant one.
We had a lot of surprises, to be open, and but mainly positive. This I really can say. The relation or the situation, the conditions we have found in Maharashtra as we are in Pune are really good for us. We got a huge support from the government, and we got infrastructure also provided in terms of an industrial area where we are now located. Okay, we have some topics, we have power shortages and all these things. This we have. We can't push this away. This also brings a loss in productivity and this kind of things. maybe we knew about it, but if you sit there then and suddenly you have it, it's a surprise. Because coming from somewhere else, you're not always used to have something like that, but it's a reality here. So, and this brings a loss in productivity. This does not kill us, but in general, it's a place for improvement. So this was something. The other thing is, what is very positive for us is the motivation of the people. This was really an absolute positive surprise. If you see the people in front of our new product, for example, when we inaugurated our plant, the joy in the eyes of the people working for a fantastic product, okay, I have to talk like this, and I think it is like this. This is fantastic. This you don't find anywhere, nowhere else in the world in this extreme manner. This was also a very, very positive surprise. There are a lot of other things, but I think that's okay for the moment.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any interventions or questions at this stage from the audience? The gentleman there.
Yeah, Martin Amick from SETM in Stanford. I have a question particularly to Mr. Mueller. I'd like to see from a human capital point of view, what's the difference between so-called the workforce on the shop floor in China versus India? What are the distinct characteristics that differentiate the Chinese and the Indian workforce on the shop floor?
So my experience in China are not so deep, so I can't bring a very good comparison. But let me give you one example. Maybe workforce in Germany. Maybe I can say something like this. And I'm an example for this. My basic skills are, I'm an electrician, for example. Yeah? I went to a company, I had to learn, or wanted to learn at the time 2 or 3 years, really a basic profession, as we say, and I'm an electrician before I went to university. So in this topic, where you have to be in the industry in a systematical way, you have to learn how to solve problems, how to find reasons for something, what to do to avoid problems in the future in a systematical way. This is what, from my point of view, is very, very important. And this still helps me today, even as I'm not working as an electrician anymore. No? But it still helps me today. And the people in the factory where you have this kind of organization and kind of vocational training as a basis, they are working in a different way. More in a certain direction. They have this productivity thinking because they know what does it mean if an equipment has a failure and it can't produce. This means losses of 20 cars per hour or something like that, and 1,000 things which are behind. And this combined with a systematical learning of technology, of computer systems, production equipment, and this brings a very, very good value to these people and then also to the companies. And this is absolutely necessary from my point of view and helpful.
If I could ask a follow-up to you, are Indian workmen more argumentative than the Chinese? Are Indian, yes to you.
Again, Chinese. I don't know, I've never worked in China, so I can't.
But are Indian workers argumentative or are they compliant?
Our experiences are that the people are very interested. Let's say it like this. They want to know what's going on. Sure, they have also some demands. They are not there. They are not coming to work for nothing or something like that. No, they need to work to maintain their life, to get income and all this kind of thing. This is normal. No, so they also have a thinking in this direction. But we found out in our case that people also understand situation. If they see a perspective of personal development, for example, that they are working with us. It is the case, no? But it depends on the behavior, as always. No? How you behave with the people. If they can walk out of the factory in the evening, really in this position and not in a position like this, and all these kind of things, this helps to get a good environment and also, let's say, a behavior which is positive for the whole situation in a company.
Arun Bharatram, one more captain of the manufacturing business.
Thank you. I'm Arun Bharatram. Just an observation, Mr. Minister, you mentioned about leadership. But I think one of the greatest assets that we have in India is entrepreneurship. And I think we've had this entrepreneurship for hundreds of years. And this has stood us in good stead even during the first 30, 40 years of nation building when we were constrained. But the entrepreneurs the entrepreneurial spirit was never dampened. And we actually learned to work through the system, which was a very adverse system. And it is only because this entrepreneurial spirit that we have in India. And that's why I kind of question when you say leadership. I think entrepreneurship and leadership in India is one of the differentiators. We have done acquisitions in Asia, and we just don't find that kind of entrepreneurship that we have found, that we have in India.
Well, I don't know whether I was misquoted, but if you remember what I said the key issue for us is not bottlenecks necessarily only on infrastructure, but the key issue for us is the fact that we have a great deal of entrepreneurship and leadership. And I did mention that those are comparative advantages and competitive advantages for us.
Well, Mukesh Bhutani, and then we carry on back to the panel.
Thank you, Shekhar. Mukesh Bhutani. We have the potential on one side, and then we have a level of competitiveness. There are big gaps today. All the weaknesses have been identified: skills, logistics, infrastructure. There's a question in everybody's mind whether the vision that the manufacturing or the Ministry of Industry has, whether that vision is shared by all the other government agencies in terms of realizing the vision. The other question is, I was surprised to figure out the conspicuous absence of labor reforms, which is integral to manufacturing. Your comments?
Both good questions. I think on the first one, I think it's very clear that in terms of government thought and process, at least this government in its first avatar and now in its second avatar, has very clearly identified areas where government intervention is required. Social sector, education, health, primarily, apart from other issues. And also very clearly identified where the private sector can step in and do much, probably in many ways, much better than government can. And infrastructure is one of those areas. So I think the government has to change its role, which it has, from being more of a adjudicator to more of a facilitator in terms of opening up processes, in terms of opening up opportunities, to the point that Baba Kalyani ji made. He talked about the issue that you need to have a track record. I am, forgive my ignorance, but I am not quite aware of that issue, because I remember in my early days as an investment banker, when the telecom sector was opened up, there was no one with the requisite amount of telecom experience who entered into the mobile industry. Or for that matter, even in the power industry, when we looked at the 5 fast-track power projects that we looked at, there was no one with that requisite experience from the private sector, but everyone did bid and everyone did get in. But that being said, I think it's very important to be able to identify where the private sector can step in and do their job. And very clearly, infrastructure is a huge glaring gap where the private sector can more than step in and do its job. So therefore, I talked about the fact that it's a $500 billion opportunity for the private sector to step in as well. We must play our role in terms of facilitating that. And to that end, I believe that we are not on different sides of that board. We are on the same side of that board, and we need to function in that manner. The second question you had is in terms of the game plan of the industry ministry in terms of rolling forward. It's very clear from our point of view, from a commerce angle and an industry angle, what we need to do, and that game plan has been refined by interactions with individuals such as yourselves and companies and corporates to carve a niche for India in the global space in the next 3 or 4 years. And the foreign trade policy is a reflection of that reality. I think it's very, very important for us to move away from traditional markets, as I said, to new markets, look at areas, as Baba Kalyani ji said also, in terms of where we have engineering expertise, core competitive advantage, and those are the areas that we tend to look at.
Thanks, Arun. You've been listening very patiently. I know that you've jumped to this side of the fence with an agenda in mind, because nobody gives up lucrative life in the private sector to come to policy making. So just tell us, what have you been reflecting on, working on, thinking about? And also the larger question, what is a big bottleneck? Is it hard infrastructure, roads, ports, power, railways, or is it soft infrastructure, that is skills, education, quality of life?
Thank you, Shekhar. Yes, I have been reflecting, and the word factory was introduced, and it reminded me that I was taught, and I worked in a manufacturing company, the only way one would learn manufacturing and the people in manufacturing was to rub one's nose on the shop floor. And my boss would call from Bombay when I was in Pune every day, how many hours have you rubbed your nose on the shop floor this morning? And though I was the chief there, and I spent hours with the people on the shop floor and rubbing my nose on the shop floor. But now I've come completely the other way, as you might say, that, up in a helicopter and looking down at these factories. And I ask myself, which we have to ask ourselves in India, this question: why do we want manufacturing? I mean, services are doing fine, it's growing jobs, and we've got some of the most competitive service industries at the high end in the world. Why manufacturing? And we always say, well, we need to employ people, and manufacturing employs people. We've got this so-called demographic dividend, which might turn to be a bust or a disaster if we don't employ the masses of young people. People shall come out of agriculture. The first thing that they can be employed in, like in China, is manufacturing. So when you look at it that way and say, well, what sort of manufacturing employs such people? The statistics show that we have, in the last few years, done fairly well, actually, in the growth of industry and manufacturing. But in the organized sector with zero growth in employment, because productivity has improved, as it should, but doesn't employ those people. The tiny sector in India employs, tiny means people are 1, 2, 3, 4 in an enterprise, 141 million people. It contributes 30% of our GDP. I mean, we ignore it. But that is where the entrepreneurship is, as Arun said. Yeah, we all struggle with inspectors and we struggle with infrastructure, but who has a greater difficulty with that? It's that tiny sector. There's a lot of entrepreneurship there. Now, so how do we grow enterprises that will employ more people, actually? Not enterprises that will use capital and not employ people. That's what we need as a strategy. But we want them to be competitive. We want them to be efficient. So here we are hearing, which is quite right, that in the country, on one side, we want to employ lots of people because there are a lot of people, but we don't have people to employ. They're not employable. So I was thinking of this analogy which came to me to say, well, I'm driving over a big oil field below, but I don't have any gas to put into the tank of my car. But there's a step in between. There's steps in between of producing it and refining it, and then it is usable in my factory, in my car. So the process of skilling rapidly on a large scale, we need to apply innovation there. Because otherwise, this resource which is available to us is not being taken advantage of us by us. And we are complaining on one side that shortage amidst plenty, actually, potentially plenty to do that. So I just wanted to make that one point, that if you talk of factor cost advantage for India, it will lie for a long time in the number of people that we have, provided we skill them and train them, and therefore get the advantage that we go. Now, how do you get large numbers of people into a manufacturing operation and make it an efficient operation? We seem to have a problem with that. Well, Henry Ford showed it could be done one time. He took masses of unskilled people, immigrants, paid them double the wages of his competitors, and yet produced at a lower cost. So where was the innovation there? The innovation was in the design of the manufacturing setup. So we do need innovations in designs of our manufacturing setup such that they shall employ. I'm talking the lower side, but even going up, the mediums, maybe the big ones also. More people, well-skilled people, which you shall skill, employed in a manufacturing setup that they are extremely competitive as a whole. What else do we need? And I'm going to use this expression, which has really been coming to me a lot. We talk about the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, right? It means that we should produce stuff which people at the bottom of the pyramid can afford, okay? But they need to have that few rupees even to buy that stuff. And they would rather buy more stuff, and we'd rather sell them more stuff. But how would they get that if they are not employed? So we need to find enterprises like Henry Ford did and said, I'm going to employ more, pay them more so they are customers for my stuff. So let's go to say we want factories with more people in them. But we don't like having employees in the factory because they cause labor problems and so on. But why don't they just be entrepreneurs and they're engaged as a part of a larger enterprise in which they're producing their stuff as small enterprises, and collectively we talked of clusters. These things are extremely competitive then, and they have interesting structural advantages because they've got redundancy possibilities in the elements of the cluster. The whole thing doesn't have to stop if some part of it has to change or to slow down to go that. So innovation in design of enterprise models too is what we do require. So the slogan that I have is that, we want factories for the people, that means producing for the people, We want factories by the people, in which production is by the people, and we also want factories which are of the people. They're owned by the people. And that way, we can describe the shape of manufacturing in India, which will be quite different to the shape of manufacturing in China so far, large mass scale. It may be more close to what manufacturing used to be like in Germany with the Mittelstand and the smaller companies, high-tech and employing, and a lot of skills built up into them. We don't need to imitate that because we've got the possibility of going much further with information technology today, which enables us to set up these distributed enterprises in which at least control and information can be spread around instead of requiring everybody to be together so that they could be controlled, by sight in the factory. So I'm really pushing the envelope to say we want our leaders to begin to think about innovations in the models of manufacturing, in the models of enterprises, which will then also produce the models, the types of products that we need. And these will be low-cost products for daily use, could be products to assist with education, health, energy, environment, as also the usual products.
Well, if I may ask Baba this question. You heard this, using your employees as entrepreneurs. Can this work, and have you experimented with this at all?
I want to clarify one. I was not talking about he, and he may be very well using in his production line. Every employee is an entrepreneur, reshaping what he does every day. I was talking about outside his factory and many such factories.
That's the reason others.
Can I just jump in? Let me actually, Arun's touched on a very, very important point. Let me give you an example of actually how that's happened in one part of my state. In my parliamentary constituency comes a very traditional, beautiful woven fabric that many probably of the ladies in the audience would probably be aware about, something called chanderi. And we have 5,000 artisans. It's something that is very close to my heart. But as across the rest of the country, handicraft is under major duress. And one of the things that I thought about was very important was they produced a beautiful product, but they didn't know what the market wanted. And then there was this intermediary in between who would buy the product from them at 1% of the cost and sell it in the Brignani showrooms in New Delhi at 10 times the price. And 80% of the value chain was taken up by the intermediary. So my target was to disintermediate the intermediary. And how do you do that? The only way you can do that is not by bringing the weavers to the market, but by taking the market to the weavers. And so we caught a number of these handicraft manufacturing companies, one of them being Fab India, who all of us probably are aware about. And I took William down to Chanderi, and I said, look, I want you to source from the weavers here, but I do not want you to do this sitting in Delhi. I want you to open a Fab India office in Chanderi, staff it there. And then we took the next logical step, giving them technological interventions, all the innovation that we have talked about, all the entrepreneurship that Bharat Ramji has talked about, the leadership capability, CAD-CAM design systems, in a small town, Chanderi, in the back of beyond near Jhansi in Madhya Pradesh, right? And then he said, okay, let's take this to the next logical step. And what is that next logical step? Exactly his idea. We set up a small company based in Chanderi. The weavers own 85% of that company. For the first time in their history, in a small part of Madhya Pradesh, weavers became owners of equity. They have started to understand the equity cult. And that product was first sold to this company. This company, in turn, sells it to Fab India. So they get two parts of the value chain. A, their product. B, their marketing part. And in year one, they have been able to return 70% of the share price as dividend. So suddenly, weavers in a remote rural part of India are being able to understand the concept of equity, completely managed by them, completely run by them. The small little shell company, which is now becoming the marketing enterprise for the Chanderi bunkers situated in Chanderi. So that kind of concept on a small scale is possible. It has been done. So I'm a firm believer that it can be done on a larger scale as well.
Maybe.
Baba.
Let me give you my view on this. I think what Arun talked about and the example that the minister gave is very valid. But, if you look at manufacturing, you have different segments of manufacturing. You can do this in mass production items, consumer products, products required for the large masses. But as a country, you also need strengths in core manufacturing. Now, core manufacturing, by its nature, is capital intensive. It cannot be done in small scale. You cannot, break it apart in 10 different little companies and do it. You want to build nuclear power plants, you just have to have core manufacturing capability. Sure. The issue is, unless you have core manufacturing, you cannot develop technology. You cannot develop the technology means, the material sciences and everything else that you need.
Or economies of scale.
Or economies of scale to really support industry, whether it's small, medium, or large. So you need that, and I think you need to differentiate that. What I was talking about, technology-oriented manufacturing, relates to core manufacturing. Now, India's core manufacturing capabilities are pretty dismal right now. We don't have the capability to make large machine tools. We don't have the capability. We have limited capability to make power plants. We have limited capability to make, aircrafts or things like that. And that's an area that you need to build, because if you want to be amongst a nation that's in the top 3 or top 5 in the world, you simply need to build these capabilities.
Arun, you want to
I would,
pick up issue?
it's interesting. Baba and I go back a long way. And it was days that I was struggling, learning how to manufacture or manage people who were manufacturing too. He was one of the great buddies who was making sure that we at least had the tough stuff, the forgings that we could make our trucks run with. So we go back understanding manufacturing a long way. Now the point is, he's right. Manufacturing is not just one thing. The shape of manufacturing that we need in the country must accommodate both types of things. We must have not just the high-tech manufacturing for the good reasons that you have mentioned, Baba, but we have to have the other one. And we've been ignoring that a lot. Now what we do want is companies in the sort of higher tech manufacturing who got an entrepreneurial leadership spirit in them. Let me say, look, we are from the auto industry, the 3 of us. We did, in my days in telco and his days in Bharat, which goes on his story, and so does the Tata Motors story. I mean, it's a very innovative company, and so is yours. Where did they get that spirit that we shall learn to do this? We will do it ourselves, which may mean that we have to struggle harder to learn and make mistakes, but we shall learn to do it, okay? That spirit is essential, and that comes under stress, under constraints only. So we got it in those days because there was infrastructure problem, because we couldn't get things, so we got it. If you look around at India today and say which companies today are being admired in the world because they innovated, you talk of Nano, you talk of his company, it's that gave them that toughness to get there. So if you make it too easy in a way, there is no innovation. And this, you'll enjoy this. I began consulting in 1989-90 in the United States to the auto industry. So I looked around at all the companies and asked the people assisting me, which companies are likely to be around in 10 years from now, see their view. And they all had this notion that, well, you have to calculate, it takes a lot of money to develop a new product, we know that. So, and you must develop new products every 5 years, new platform, and so they build up. There's so many $1 billion a company should be able to raise, otherwise it's out of business. So by that, they concluded that you have to have a certain size. And in that, there were 4 companies that would survive into this century. They were General Motors, Ford, Volkswagen, and perhaps Toyota. And the ones below that that should die were Fiat and Honda and went on. And you look, see what's happened. And I said to them, coming from telco, from Tata Motors, that sometimes you can have more money that is good than is good for you. You become slack. And I said, I predict actually General Motors is the one that's going to be in trouble. But no, scale. You don't understand scale. I said, well, let's see. Innovation comes when there is no scale. You grow big. You're not born big. So I think the spirit, what you pointed out, even into our big ones, Baba, I think we need more of that.
So that's the origin of cash for clunkers.
Yes.
Any questions from the audience? I think we're running out of time. Or I have Vinod. Sorry. Sunil, sorry. I've got light in my eyes, so
I'm Sunil Ralan from Chennai. I'll just draw the minister's attention to the question my friend Mukesh asked a little while earlier. In manufacturing competitiveness, I think the world has certainly realized that India has a lot to offer, particularly in comparison to China, because there's one main difference in China is made in China and made by China. Whereas in India, whatever is made in India or made by India is a lot more competitive. We have a classical example in Chennai where Nokia is a very successful export company, and they find that their manufacturing costs are 12 to 13% lower than what they do in their own factories in China. And we have other footwear manufacturing companies which you have yourself visited, and they have come in here. There's two such companies, one in near Chennai and one on the border state of Chennai and Andhra near Tada. And both of these factories are going to be ending up employing close to between 10 to 15,000 workers, whom they are taking from the neighboring villages.
Can you please wind this up quick?
Training them up, and you really need to address the...
And mind you, if I may just add on to that, what I was most impressed about was 80% of them women.
Exactly. So the only question that's going to come out of this whole process is at some point we're going to have, we need to have a labor reform policy, which I think probably missed your attention.
Is that possible in this parliament?
I think so. I think, Shekhar, that's a factor not more of policy making, but more of environment. I think it's very important. Of course, labor reform is something that is augured for, has been augured for a long period of time. But I think it's very important to have that safety net in place first before you actually put on the brakes in terms of labor reform. And I think we were heading in that direction with 9% growth rate. Because of the slowdown, I think that's been delayed a bit. But I think when you have programs like NREGS and others in place and you have sustained growth, then I think is the time to look at implementation of something like that.
One more question from the audience, if there is a hand. No? Then before concluding, I'll ask Joerg, one of mine. Tell us, what brought you to India? Was it the size of the Indian market, or was it the potential of manufacturing in India?
It was for us very clear the opportunities the Indian market offers. Because in our growth strategy as a company, we recognize the opportunities the Indian market delivers. And therefore we decided for this project, especially to serve the Indian customers. So it was very clear the Indian market, and all the researches we have done brought us to the result with all the things we have found out. Now we're coming back to skills and so on, that it really makes sense to come to here and start an operation here in India, and not to import or something like that. We think as a company, if you want to be successful in India, we have to manufacture in India, we have to be a part of the Indian community, we want not to import the things, we also will buy our parts in India and so on and so on. This is absolutely necessary, and what we see now, it's also possible.
Well, I mean, I've attended many such panel discussions on manufacturing in India, but I find that this is unusual because this is the one which has had the least complaining. I have found people in the audiences stand up and say, but this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. And also I found an undercurrent that basically says, you can talk about this, but we can't do it. So I think if that undercurrent is not there, that shows that things have changed for the better. There is more confidence. There is a sense, yes, that there's more to do, but the very fact that we are now talking of skill development as a challenge, instead of just getting some of the basics right, is progress. So thank you very much, my brilliant panelists, and thank you very much, a wonderful audience. I know this is a challenging time, and this is a most unique session of all, because it's the only session in this very busy 2 days that was held in 2 halls, and that held on to its audience. Thank you very much.